welcome back to Meet Me in the Middle with Lindsay Pollard and myself, Joy. That's a weird way to introduce myself and myself, Joy. Okay, so we're keeping it real today, but we are so excited today. I have actually today a dear friend of mine, but he is very prestigious, I'm going to say. This is Dr. David Blackwell here. He's the Senior Director of Drug Safety Research and Development for Pfizer. And I'm going to read just a snippet of his bio because I want you to kind of know where he's coming from as he answers a lot of the questions we're going to pelt him with about a lot of things today. So Dr. Blackwell is Senior Director, as I said, in Drug Safety Research and Development within the Worldwide Research, Development, and Medical Division of Pfizer, Incorporated, where he serves as a General Toxicology Lead and has over 30 years of experience in drug development. Hold that thought. Now I'm going to move down to another key aspect of what he does. He is the current lead of the Pfizer Global Black Community External Impact Pillar with a focus on addressing social inequities through strategic external partnerships and programming to improve our community's ability to reduce healthcare disparities while building relationships within our communities. All right, that's the one that we're going to talk a lot about right now. I spit out a lot of words and I am so ready for somebody else to talk. But we want to talk for a minute here about health equity, specifically for African Americans. And I know David is a good friend of mine. From years ago, we were in church together in Connecticut, and this is why I have a lot of trust for him as well as a person. As a man of faith, follower of Jesus, and as well as a doctor and a scientist working currently and has been working for years. So it just gives a lot of credibility to me personally, and I just wanted to share that bigger bio with you so you would understand kind of the importance and the significance of this. But David just went to a summit about health equity for African Americans, and we want to talk about that and about concerns toward the medical field that have hindered people from trusting and accessing health care. Okay, so that was the longest introduction I've ever done. Welcome, Dr. Blackwell, my friend David.
So excited to have you here.
It's totally my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so talk to us about, I know the summit that you went to, and just some highlights of some things that are just you're passionate or on your heart about health equity for African Americans. Just jump in.
Yeah, so I'm going to apologize in advance because my wife says I'm a context kind of guy. So it may be because of my scientific training. So I've got to give you, I would love just to answer your question,
Sure.
But to give you some context of why the summit occurred.
Okay.
So the summit was put on by a group called the Black Directors Health Equity Agenda, or the BDHEA. You can find them at bdhea.org. And the whole goal of this organization is to help the major healthcare entities, and we're talking mostly about the large insurance companies that fund a lot of the medical care for all communities. But in particular, the focus is on the board of directors for these organizations, because until the boards of directors, and Pfizer would be in that category as well, really start looking at health equity as an issue, and then it's really hard for the grassroots to kind of make the needle move, right? We can talk about it, we can do a lot, but the folks who make the decisions and have the money are the ones that make things happen. So the whole goal of the BDHEA in having the virtual summit, it was supposed to be an in live summit at Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, but because of what was going on with the COVID pandemic, it was thought best to keep everyone safe just to do it virtually. So it turned into a virtual forum instead. It was for 2 days, the end of September. And so we had a lot of folks who, again, who sit at the table for these board of directors of these major healthcare organizations to talk about what they are doing. So basically trying to get learn from each other, best case scenarios, best in practice kind of cases, and then try to, of course, then amplify that to other groups as well. I will say that I had the opportunity, so I'm a founding member of this organization, which is a great honor for me. But in addition, we had the opportunity to work with Deloitte. As you know, it's a large corporation that does a lot of nice, development leadership kinds of things. And so we use their expertise to help put together a 60-page document, which is called a playbook, so that the playbook can be used now by other entities, these other boards of directors, to, again, best practice and help move the needle on health equity. So that was what the summit was all about. We were honored to have several of the CEOs from these major organizations to be a part of it. When you go to the website, you'll see some of that content there. But the whole goal is to start to really do more from the top down to put health equity on agendas for board of directors, for hospital care company organizations, and everyone who kind of deals with healthcare, right? So it's kind of the top down coming forward, as well as the work that's all been going on for quite some time from the bottom up. So hopefully the two together working in concert now will be able to really make some differences. So that's a nutshell of what's going on with the BDHEA. And I'll just say a little bit more. As you know, there's plenty of research that shows where we are as a country with healthcare in general, but more specifically when it comes to the minority population, where we're leading indicators for comorbidities, which is bad, and lagging behind for the ones that are good, like longevity. So, and COVID-19 only, shined a spotlight on what we already knew about the health disparities. So the goal is to try, now that we have, more visibility, I would say, with this whole issue, because, people don't really know unless they're in this field, to help everyone understand that we all are involved with, trying to make healthcare as well as other social issues more equitable. So that's what the BDHEA is about.
Okay. Talk about, some people may not even realize that the health equity, the disparity within minority groups. What is the mistrust there? What are the factors that are affecting that? Lindsay, jump in when you have a question on that, because Lindsay works with the population and understands this really well in our community. So what are the issues that is causing that?
So I would say one of the first things is just access, right? So one of the things I did over the last 10 years, I had the great fortune to be a Pfizer Global Health Fellow, which is kind of a Peace Corps for Pfizer colleagues. So for 6 months, and Joy, you might remember this, my wife and I and our daughter Rachel went to Houston, Texas, to live in Houston and to work at an HIV/AIDS clinic, because the clinic director, a very wise gentleman who is always trying to help his population, his community, he started this non-for-profit organization called the St. Hope Foundation, with the goal of having a place where folks who have been diagnosed with HIV/AIDS would be able to do basically one-stop shopping for their healthcare. So they already had a primary care facility. They had social workers there to help folks with the rest of their issues. They had a psychiatrist. They have dental clinic. They were in the process of starting a pharmacy so that folks could get their meds while they're visiting their doctor. But one of the things that he had the foresight to try to do is increase his patient population to clinical trials research. And I'll try to explain why that's important, as succinctly as possible. But one of the advantages of being in a clinical trial is, number one, you get a very good health assessment before you enter the trial. In addition, while you're on the trial, you continue to get routine health assessments so that, any condition that you might have is being monitored by a healthcare professional. So Joy, to kind of answer part of your question, again, I talked about access being a big barrier. In addition to access is, if you have access, do you have the ability to get to your doctor? Do you have a doctor? And again, this was a very purposeful clinic positioned in a community that was very close to the bus terminal, so folks could have use urban or mass transit. They needed to do that to get to and from the clinic. And the clinical trial piece was, besides what I just mentioned as far as having access to care while you're on the trial, you're also on the front line of being able to get new breakthrough therapies, right? So drug companies like Pfizer, we have to do clinical trials to, for a drug to be approved, there's three things you need. It needs to be safe, number one, Hippocratic oath, do no harm. Number two, it has to be efficacious. That means it has to work. It has to do what you say it's going to do. And number three, you have to be able to manufacture it and get it to the population. Those are the three main criteria to get a drug approved anywhere in the world, FDA included for the United States. So in that process of getting the testing for the safety, for the efficacy, having the clinical trials there potentially puts you in a position where you're getting a new therapy before anyone else can, because it's an experiment. So you're testing, does this compound work? Is it safe? And so Rodney Goody, who's the CEO of this organization, really wanted that for his clientele. And so he asked Pfizer if we would be willing to put a global health fellow in St. Hope Foundation. So I was the second fellow. There was a fellow before me who kind of started things. I continued. Another one came after me. We started the pharmacy with another fellow. So, for about 5 years, there was quite a, every 6 months we would rotate through. So I tell you that story for two reasons. Number one, about the access piece, but number two is because that's where I personally got my interest of being closer to the patient. So what I do every day for my non-clinical safety testing is that we test the drugs or vaccines to make sure that they are safe enough to go to the clinical trial. So as I mentioned, those folks who are volunteering themselves, and we really are appreciative for them because they don't have to do it, but they do. And so for those who did it for the vaccine and for other things, without them, we can't go forward. So having folks willing to go forward and be a participant in the clinical trial is very important to us. So our job, or my job specifically, is to make sure, as I said, that we do no harm, so that when these folks get into their clinical trial, particularly for phase one, and I'll just spend a few minutes here if you don't mind about the drug development process. It's basically broken into three phases: phase 1, 2, and 3, very complex. But phase 1 is typically in normal subjects, we call them. So they're typically males, 18 to 25 years old, because they're deemed as, kind of healthy guys. And the reason why we do males is because we don't know anything about reproductive risk. Those studies come later, so we don't want to put a fetus who didn't sign up for a trial, at risk, right, of being exposed to something that may be beneficial. It also may not. We don't know. So anyway, so phase 1 is about safety. So my job as a preclinical, non-clinical safety person is to make sure that the studies that are being done in clinical subjects are safe for them to do. So we know what to look for in the clinical trials. And so when things happen that are unexpected, that we can stop, right? And we know how long the drug is going to be available. So we know, how it would potentially impact a person. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, we defined the safety, at least in normals. Now we have to go into the disease population. So let's just say it's a diabetes drug. We would recruit folks who have diabetes, and we would test our drug versus the standard of care, whatever that might be for the day. And the comparison is usually done in a double-blind, placebo-controlled, which means double-blind, meaning that the individual who's taking the drug doesn't know what it is, and the person who's administering the drug doesn't know what it is. So you can't tell whether a person got the placebo, which is, a non-active, it's like, let's just say sugar water, right? Bad for diabetes, but let's just say it's, it's or saline, something that's inert. So that's the placebo part. And the double blind, as I just mentioned, and then the standard of care. So you would compare it against a known standard of care that works, because the goal is that you need to be better than the standard of care. Otherwise, you're not really adding any value, right? So that's phase 2. And then phase 3 is basically the same as phase 2, except it's larger trial. You usually go international to make sure that, different people groups have sometimes different metabolism and things are different, so that you want to make sure that, you have a good representation of who you may eventually be dispensing the drug to, right? So it's kind of hoping to do away any biases on, just body type, ethnicity, those kind of issues. So those are the 3 phases of drug development. So I'm in the preclinical phase, which is a little bit far removed from the patient. When I was at St. Hope, I was much closer to the patient because I was doing the clinical trials, which was awesome experience. And I realized that I really liked that piece. I didn't want to be a clinician, so to speak, as doing those trials in my current role at Pfizer, but I liked the fact that, I would just have more closer association of how the process works.
Yeah.
So I went back to school, got a master's of public health with a focus in global health and a focus in health disparities. And so that was my impetus of moving forward. So from 2010 to 2015, I did that. And now, it's post that, and I'm trying to use that wherever I can. And this is a great opportunity. So I apologize for that long story, but I wanted to explain the clinical trial piece because it's really important. And we'll talk about it later when it comes to the vaccine. So access is really getting back to your original question, Joy, access is probably the biggest barrier. And the second barrier really is, as you said, the trust piece. Because of the history and it's long and tainted, and we can go into some of that, at another time or, later in this conversation.
Yeah.
Folks don't like to go to the doctor, right? Because typically when they go, it's bad news, right? And no one wants to hear bad news. So we call it skillful neglect, right? And not go. So one of the things we have to do is improve that. Number one, doctors need to be more sensitive, and I think they are, to be honest with you. I know my GP's much better than he used to be. He sits down now and he puts his laptop aside and we have a conversation. He wants to know what's my concerns, and I want his expertise, but he's first asking me, which that didn't happen, to be honest with you, 5 years ago. So I think even the older doctors, because I'm, as they would say, on the back nine, and he is as well. So even the older population understands. Older physicians who weren't raised in that kind of environment for medical school understand the importance of engaging their patients, right, and having a conversation with them. And you're not there to tell them what they need to do. You're there to talk with them and find out what they're willing to do, right? And I'll use another example, and I apologize for these long diatribe here, but my father smoked for like 30 plus years. As long as I can remember growing up, he would smoke. And one day his physician told him, you should stop smoking. And he did. He just stopped smoking. All it took was his doctor to say, you need to stop. And I will say this piece and I'll stop. That's what my own personal research found. So as I mentioned, I had a specialty in health disparities. And so my capstone project for my master's of public health was in health disparities, specifically looking at, health disparities with adult vaccinations. In that case, it was flu and influenza. It was influenza and pneumonia. And in both cases, the number one thing that helped people get their immunization when they weren't thinking otherwise is their doctor recommended it. So it's still true now, even though it was my father, probably 40, 50 years ago. If your doctor says you should do something or you shouldn't do something, it carries the most weight more than anything else that research shows. The number one reason. So getting back to access, Joy, and then I'll stop, it's really, really important that people have that relationship with the physician, right? And I'm sure, Lindsay, in your circles, the folks that you work with and how you do your work, in many cases, individuals may not have a physician that they go to. They go to the emergency room or wherever they can get health care when they need it and not have a relationship with their physician. And, so part of the BDHEA, and I'll come back to that, another leg of what they're trying to accomplish is not only work at the boardroom level, but also work at the pipeline level of getting more people of color into the healthcare profession, whether that's doctors, nurses, PAs, APRNs, you name it, we need them all. And they're trying to, or they are actually funding more positions at particularly the 4 historically Black colleges and universities, but have medical schools. That's Meharry, that's Morehouse, that's Howard, and that's Drew University out in California. So not helping there, but also other institutions to make sure that we have more folks who look like the population they're trying to serve in the healthcare, because that's also a big barrier for some. So I'm going to stop there and let you go on.
Well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a break. That was, everybody needs a David Blackwell. Let me just put it that way. Everybody
Right.
needs a David Blackwell, okay? That's so informative. I mean, you may have thought that you took a long time, but we needed to hear that. And everything that you're saying is just like feeding my soul. So thank you so much. When we come back, we're gonna talk a little bit more about mistrust in the African-American community with science and the medical profession. And we're also going to talk about Tuskegee, because I saw that in your bio. So I wanted to ask you about Tuskegee, and then also give some insight on the Tuskegee experiment that went down. Okay.
Certainly.
So when we come back, we're going to come back for that.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me just say too, another credibility factor is, David, you're from Illinois, you said, right? But your wife, I love Audrey, she's from the Deep South, yes?
The great state of Mississippi.
Oh.
Exactly. So this is important for all of us here, is that you represent, where you came from in Illinois, she's the Deep South, and you guys married, and yet you went to school in the Deep South. And so just as understanding of a larger population and culture, that's just a significant piece that we need to know. But there is so much more. We're going to talk some more about that mistrust thing. So you guys come back. Don't forget. We'll see you in a minute.